There is a state of emergency in parts of Northern California as we come on. At least 1,000 more acres destroyed in just the past 24 hours. Firefighters battling around the clock tonight. Homes already destroyed. Hundreds more in danger tonight.
We've seen a lot of high severity fires in the past few years. Growing up, I'd see them maybe, every 3 or 4 years, every 5 years, but now it's every year. This is becoming the norm when it really shouldn't be. Prescribed fire can be a tool used, perhaps the most powerful tool to combat the impacts of high severity fires.
We have to reestablish a positive relationship with fire. We talk about fire suppression policies that are, 100 years old. That's experimental. Our practices in terms of using fire to manage this landscape, that's not experimental. Those are tried and true practices that we know work. Karuk people have been here since the beginning of time.
There were villages right here in this valley. On each side of the river, people would come together from those villages every year and do some burning. When a wildfire is occurring in the backcountry, places like this are relatively safe if you have a frequent human-interacted fire regime in place around your community.
Our knowledge of this landscape and the use of fire to manage this landscape, to protect our communities, to enhance the resources that we need to survive as human beings in this place. It's here. It's embedded in the people. It's embedded in this landscape. The species that exist here, these are species that are used to fire. They're fire resilient. They're fire adapted.
I can't imagine, my children not being able to eat acorns or teaching them how to process acorns, but we've had years where there are no acorns to gather. Lately, the bad years have been outweighing the good years because they are being infested with these bugs that, low severity fire usually helps with, and also less dense forest where it's more balanced. We wouldn't have that problem.
Liability is a huge issue when it comes to using fire, especially a fire that is lit by a person. In a perfect world, we'd be exempt from that because we didn't create this problem as tribal people. We actually had a pretty solid system of living with fire developed, and that ended up getting regulated out of our hands.
Since colonization and settlement by Americans, you've had the removal of tribal management, particularly their burning and stewardship. And then you've had fire suppression policies that have excluded fire, both lightning ignitions and tribal burning, coupled also with post-World War II road building, timber harvesting. A lot of the older growth forest has been cut. A lot of the more open areas have grown in because of the absence of fire.
When the forests were established is when, people's homes were being burned down. California Indian children, there's laws that allowed them to be enslaved. They're also being forcibly removed from their families and put into boarding schools like my grandma. More important than the return of fire is the return of Karuk people to their places and to the decision-making tables about how this land is used and managed and cared for.
We're about to come online with about 5,500 acres that we can treat as our first demonstration project. Our next step is going to be looking at Off-Field Mountain so we can start to do what we need to do to restore that ceremonial burning practice. What we really need is stability in our funding sources and flexibility in our regulatory processes, and to use more of our cultural indicators for when we would use fire versus some of the current regulatory indicators.
I think what needs to happen next is to maintain the close partnership and collaborative work that's going on. If we look at what's important to the tribes, it's water, it's wildlife, it's a range of resources in the forest that are good for tribal members, but also the public and the broader society across our national forest.
We have made some progress in working with our federal and state partners on some of these issues, particularly around an executive order that Governor Brown just put out. We all have something at stake when it comes to fire.
The more time goes on that we don't put fire back on these landscapes, at the time and at the scale that we need to, then it's going to do it not on our terms.
People are beginning to see the benefits of prescribed fire more now than they have in a long time, over 100 years. When you see it, you realize like, oh, it's going to be okay.
We have the solution, right? Our first response has to be manage it, not suppress it, but manage it.